I call them the what if thoughts. What if this terrible thing happens? What if that person is thinking this about me? What if they said that, but they really meant that? What if this fails? What if I'm not good enough? What if it all becomes a complete disaster? Those kind of intrusive, invasive thoughts that come into our brain and create all kinds of anxiety, stress, worry, shame. It's normal for human brains to do this. And if your human brain does this, you're not alone and nothing has gone terribly wrong. But many of the strategies that we think are going to be helpful for dealing with those kinds of intrusive thoughts actually end up making them worse. And today we're going to talk about what those typical strategies are that we use and then which ones you can use instead that are going to be a lot more helpful. So stay tuned. I've got a lot of good stuff for you today. But first, if you're new here, welcome to our incredible little corner on the internet. Take a second and introduce yourself in the comment section below. If you're back again, always good to have you. Either way, my name is Kristina, and I am a registered clinical therapist, a researcher, a coach, a speaker, and the author of my book, Drive Your Own Darn Bus. And I help heart-centered humans think better, feel better, show up better, and live better so that they can like themselves and their lives more every day. And those intrusive thoughts, the way that we typically approach them is the way that you might approach an uninvited guest that is going to make them not want to leave. So think about this. If someone shows up at your house that you really don't want to be there and you invite them in and you entertain them and you engage with them and maybe you feed them and you make it quite a lovely atmosphere for them, they're not going to want to leave. If the more attention you give to them, the more they are going to want to stay. And this is what we often do with our intrusive or invasive fear, anxiety, shame, or worry producing thoughts, the ones that kind of get in there and that we have a hard time getting past, getting through, letting go. So we typically tell ourselves when these thoughts are coming in, we engage them by saying something like, oh, just think positive. And we engage them. Now, it's not unhelpful to tell yourself to just think positive, but there's a time and a place, and when you have those intrusive thoughts are neither the time and usually not the place. Because what happens when we tell ourselves to just think positive and it doesn't work, then we tell ourselves we're doing something wrong, that we can't just think positive. We can't just assume the best. Maybe I am going to get into a car accident if I go out, but I'm not going to. It's going to be fine. But then there's that part of your brain that's like, well, it's possible. And so it knows that you're lying to yourself by saying everything is going to be fine because you don't know. Or if you're like, oh yeah, that person's totally not judging me for what I said at that event. But part of your brain is like, well, they could be. And so it knows that you're lying to yourself. So sometimes just telling yourself to think positive, it doesn't work because your brain knows that it's not true. The thoughts that you're trying to feed it that are just positive and wonderful and amazing and everything's going to be great are just not true. So it pushes back and sometimes even makes those intrusive thoughts even worse. So the second thing that we often do when we have those thoughts is to tell ourselves to just stop thinking this way. Just let it go. And you know the saying, what you resist persists. And so telling yourself to just stop it, it's like telling yourself to not think about the white elephant. The more you think about telling yourself to not think about it, the more you think about it. To tell yourself to not think this thought, then your brain is like, why shouldn't I think this thought? Why are you telling me to not think this thought? Is there something there in this thought that I should be thinking about? Why are you trying so hard to push it away? And again, we're entertaining that thought by trying to force ourselves not to. And if you have ever tried to tell yourself to just stop thinking a certain way or just stop thinking a certain thing or stop worrying about something, how well has that worked? And if you're telling yourself it totally doesn't work for me, there's something wrong with me, it's not that there's something wrong with you. That's just not the right way to go about it. This is not how human brains work. It's not yours. It's everyone's. The next thing that we often tell ourselves to do is to tell ourselves, well, this thought doesn't make sense. Just get over it. That's silly, right? So we're trying to apply logic to an emotional thought, right? So if you're in this habit of having self-doubt, of fearing what people are going to think about you, about worrying of being a failure or making a mistake, and just telling yourself that this doesn't make sense and you shouldn't think this way, if there is sort of these deeper issues going on, again, your brain is going to resist it because it's like, well, I don't believe you. I tell myself this doesn't make sense. This is silly. I don't want to think this way. But then there's this other part of you that's like, I kind of believe that there's some truth there. I kind of have this deeper issue that's going on that's creating that resistance. So you can have a conscious thought, but then your emotions don't follow suit because you have another thought that maybe it is true. Maybe it could happen. So telling yourself this doesn't make sense, there probably is something in this thought that does make sense. And you have another thought in alignment with the thought you don't want to be thinking that does make sense. The next thing that we often do to try to deal with our intrusive thoughts is giving those thoughts credit. Have you ever done that? Have you ever been like, well, I wonder what they're thinking about me. They're probably thinking that I'm an idiot or that I'm dumb or that I don't know what I'm doing. Well, it must be true if they're thinking that. Those things must be true about me if I think that they're thinking that. Or if you think to yourself when you're out driving your car, well, what if I just accidentally turned the steering wheel and ran into the side and went flying off of the bridge in my car? Well, if I'm thinking that way, then it could be true that I might do that. And so then maybe you avoid driving. Or if you think to yourself, well, I'm probably going to say something silly, or I'm going to put my foot in my mouth, or I'm going to accidentally offend someone if I go to this event. And if I do that, then it's going to feel terrible. Then, I better not go. There's something wrong with me. I always do these kinds of things and I can't do that and I can't deal with that. And so I better not go. And then you stay home. Or I better not put myself up for that promotion because I'm probably not going to get it. I'm probably going to look like an idiot. They're probably going to wonder why I would apply in the first place because I really don't know what I'm doing. And then you don't do it. So giving those thoughts too much credit, thinking, well, if I'm having this thought, then it must be true, that it makes sense. So I'm not going to even bother. The next thing we do is when we have an intrusive thought that's causing anxiety, worry, or fear, we try to over control. So let's say you're wondering why your friend hasn't texted you back and you have these intrusive thoughts like they don't like me or they're mad at me or maybe I did something wrong and you can't let it go. And then you try to control the outcome. You try to make sure everything's okay by texting them, by like text bombing them and being like, is everything okay? What's going on? Are you mad at me? And then they're kind of like, whoa, I just was in the middle of something, or I had a really busy day, or I saw your text and then I got distracted and I forgot to text you back. And then we get ourselves into this state of trying to control the outcome, trying to do all these things to indulge the thought and be like, oh my gosh, this is what I'm thinking. So I got to do something to control it. And then it ends up keeping us focused on the thought, obsessing about the thought, and usually taking some kind of action that creates more harm than the actual reality of that fear thought. So let's say your friend actually is mad at you and that's why they haven't texted you back. Well, instead of just waiting to see and, giving it maybe a day for them to text you back and then checking in and being like, hey, just wanted to make sure you got my text. And then maybe they say at that point, yeah, I'm actually kind of upset with you about what you said. And then you can deal with that. You can have that conversation versus getting all worked up about it and then endlessly texting them. Or let's say you have a grown-up child who is making some decisions that you're finding difficult, that you're like, I don't think they're making great decisions with their lives. And so you get in there and you start to meddle and you start to be like, what are you doing? And why are you doing this? And we need to figure this out. And I need to tell you what you should be doing. And then you end up kind of alienating them and pushing them away instead of taking a step back and managing your mind around it and being like, okay, what are they doing? Why am I finding this difficult? Is there any way that I could help them in a supportive way, not in an anxiety-driven way? And taking that step back and not getting so intense and trying to control the outcome. and letting ourselves just sort of ride it out a little bit, seeing what happens and trusting that we'll be able to deal with whatever that thing is that we are fearing, if we are able to not just try so hard to control it. Usually our attempts to control things end up making it worse. So if those things are not helpful ways to deal with these intrusive, invasive thoughts, then what does work? Because as we've established that the more we spend time in those thoughts, the more we entertain those thoughts, the more we feed those thoughts, the more control they have. Or even the more we try to numb, repress, or avoid those thoughts, the more they push back, the more attention they want to have. So what do we do instead? We accept those thoughts. We actually radically accept those thoughts. And it's a concept that is aptly called radical acceptance. And what radical acceptance means is that we accept the thoughts that are going through our mind, whether they are good or bad, or healthy or unhealthy, or serving or unserving, or productive or unproductive. They are just thoughts. So we learn how to notice the thoughts without attaching to them, without clinging to them, without holding on until the bitter end. We just notice. And I'm going to teach you 5 things that you can say to yourself that's going to help you not cling so tightly to them and accept them and notice them without letting those thoughts take over and drive and dictate your mental and emotional state, which usually doesn't feel all that good, so we probably don't want it. So the first thing that you can say to yourself is, I notice I'm having the thought that. I notice I'm having the thought that things could go terribly. I notice I'm having the thought that that person might be judging me. I notice I'm having the thought that a catastrophe could happen. I notice I'm having the thought that this might mean something terrible about me. Whatever that is, I notice I'm having the thought that. And do you see how just saying that sentence creates this space? The space where we're not like, oh my gosh, this is the thought. It's so true. What am I going to do with it? How am I going to deal with this? Just saying, I notice I'm having this thought right now. And in this moment, I don't have to actually do anything about it. I'm just going to notice it. Giving yourself that space, taking that breath, noticing it for what it is just a thought. Which leads us to the next thing you could say to yourself, and that is just to say this is possible, that this terrible outcome could happen, and it's also not possible. This could happen or it might not happen. They could be thinking this or they could be not thinking this. They could be not be thinking at all, or they could be thinking something positive. Something terrible could happen, something great could happen, something probably pretty neutral could happen, which is usually the case. So just acknowledging it, this is a possibility, this is also a possibility, allowing your brain to just consider all the different possibilities keeps you from clinging so tightly to the one terrible outcome possibility. But it still acknowledges that it's there, but it kind of diffuses the intensity of it by acknowledging all different kinds of possibilities. The next thought that you can offer yourself, or the thing you can say to yourself, is when you have these intrusive, invasive, anxiety-producing thoughts about something terrible that maybe might or could happen, thank your brain. Thank you, brain, for trying to protect me. Thank you, brain, for thinking of all the awful, terrible, tragic things that could happen and trying to prepare me for that. Thank you. But actually, I'm okay. And actually, I am safe. And actually, nothing terrible has happened. And back to our last one, it's possible that it could, and it's also possible that it could not. But thank you, brain, for doing your job to try to protect me or prepare me. But I'm actually okay. The next thought, the next thing you can say to yourself is to just accept that, yeah, I can go with this thought if I want to. I can ride this thought to the bitter end. I can spiral and I can spin and I can ruminate and I can perseverate on this thought to my heart's content. And I can bring myself into a state of anxiety or worry or misery or shame. And I can do that if I want to. It doesn't make me less of a person. It doesn't make me an inferior person. It doesn't make me an unworthy person for me to just go with whatever terrible thought is entering into my brain. But is this how I want to be thinking? How I want to be feeling? How I want to be living? Is this how I want to be making my choices? Is this how I want my life to go in this moment, in any moment? So giving yourself that choice to be like, I can totally go with this and I can totally run with this thought and I can totally think of all kinds of other thoughts to compound on top of this thought that's going to make me feel even worse, and I can. But is that what I want? And so allowing yourself to make that conscious choice to say, I can go with this. Is this going to get me the outcome that I want? And if the answer is, well, no, I don't want to feel terrible. But maybe you do want to feel terrible and you just go with it. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're like, I don't actually want to feel terrible, then it's redirecting into some kind of thought that's going to be more useful. It's setting your intentional thoughts. Like that saying goes, we are not in charge or in control of the first thought, but we are in charge of that second thought. We can't control the first thought, but we get to decide what we want to think next. Our fifth strategy, our fifth thing to say to ourselves, is to just make a name for that thought. Maybe that's your shame gremlin that's coming in there and trying to get you all worried about not being good enough, not being worthy enough, not being lovable enough or competent enough or capable enough, and your brain's spinning on that. Or maybe it's that fear monster, right? Call him Harry. You can name it. You can actually give that thought a person name and call him Harry. I thought Harry off the top of my head because I'm like, Harry, scary monster, this monster thought that's coming in and trying to scare me and worry me and create all kinds of fear and anxiety, and be like, hey, Harry, hey, shame gremlin, I see you there. I see you. You're trying to come in. This is me. This is this thought, this shame thought, this fear thought, this worry thought. I see you coming in and trying to infiltrate my brain. And we're just not going to do that today. We are just not going there today. It's not helpful. It's not getting me to where I want. It's not helping me think or feel or live the way I want to be. So thanks, but not today. And just naming it and seeing it as like, this is me and this is this intrusive thought that's coming in and trying to intrude my brain. But not today. Accepting that these thoughts show up. Accepting that we are human beings with human brains that do this. There's nothing wrong with you. Nothing has gone wrong. Nothing is flawed or broken or weird about you. If this happens to you, if your brain does this, it just means that you have a human brain. And all human brains do this to different extents and at different times. So accepting that your brain is doing this and then deciding what you want to do next. With these big intrusive thoughts comes big uncomfortable feelings, difficult feelings. And if you find that you get a lot of feelings stuck inside of you and you don't know how to process them through, then I have a mini course for you. It's called The Sensitive Person's Guide to Handling Big Feelings. And it's going to teach you how to process your emotions with both cognitive strategies, so both with your brain, and some really good ones for processing them with your body. It's a 2-part mini course, how to process emotions with your brain, how to process emotions with your body. It also comes with a ton of really great bonuses, so you can check that out, the link to that in the description below. Now let me know, which one of these strategies are you going to try first? Let's carry on the conversation in the comments. Always good to have you here. And until next time, take good care of yourself. Take good care of those around you. Bye for now.